Tonight we finally saw the finale of Daredevil Born Again, and with that comes my review of it. And full warning, I am going completely in-depth with story details for both the finale as well as the rest of the season, so spoiler alert of course. Though if you've clicked on this video, you more than likely just finished watching that ending and you're dying to talk about all the crazy things that went down. And believe me, things got absolutely nutty. And with Born Again as a whole, I'm tempted to do two separate videos because of how insane the disparity in quality is between the two parts of the series. For those of you who don't know, MCU leader and future dictator of the world, Kevin Feige, actually stopped the production of Daredevil Born Again at a certain point and brought in the filmmaking duo Benson and Moorhead to do a complete creative overhaul of the story. I've heard conflicting reports over what exactly was rearranged, but needless to say, Marvel was not satisfied with the direction the show was taking. But while a lot of stuff was changed and ultimately scrapped, a sizable portion of that original version of the show by the original team Matt Corman and Chris Ord sadly still remained, namely episodes 2 through 7. Episodes 1, 8, and 9 were where most of the new stuff was added, and that stuff was pretty damn great. And of course, while I was quite hyped going into Born Again from the very beginning, I was also incredibly nervous. Because not only is the original Netflix series my top superhero show ever, but Daredevil is my favorite Marvel character, period. He's a character who I find endlessly fascinating and a bit relatable, and has by far the most consistent comic book runs when compared to the other characters. And that original series was able to do him justice while also creating an exhilarating narrative all on its own. And I know that it's unfair to compare this series to the original, but it's a struggle that the creative teams knew they were walking into. They signed up knowing that this was going to be a follow-up to a universally beloved classic that came out 10 years ago. Wait, holy crap, that thing came out 10 years ago? God, I'm getting old. But the good stuff here is quite good. Namely, those final 2 episodes I mentioned, where the new showrunners Benson and Moorhead aimed to try and tie together as many of the lingering plot threads as they could. And by the time we reached Born Again's conclusion, Fisk had effectively seized control of New York, using his position as mayor to declare martial law and allow his Punisher task force to patrol the streets. The Red Hook Project had also been revealed as a way for his wife, Vanessa, to bring in imports in a completely legal way. This is what actually led to Foggy's death back in the premiere, and to the show's credit, they did repeatedly bring it up throughout the season. By the time we finally got to those revelations, things had gotten dark. I mean, like literally dark, as Kingpin caused a citywide blackout to set his plans in motion. And I couldn't help but wonder where Spider-Man was during all this crazy crap. I have no doubt Marvel will tie him into tonight's events in his upcoming Brand New Day movie, especially with all the vigilante activity being outlawed now in Manhattan. So I have no doubt that the Kingpin will give Spider-Man a real headache. Kinda like the headache he gave the police commissioner. Get it? Because he crushed his head? Anyway, seeing all this occur was absolutely riveting. I was a little nervous that they were going to undo Foggy's death and reveal that he was actually in witness protection, just like in the comics. Don't get me wrong, I do love Foggy as a character, but bringing him back would seriously undercut a lot of the emotion that his death caused. Instead, we got a bunch of moments that, as a Daredevil comic book fan, just filled my heart with absolute glee. And to the showrunners' credit, they even went so far as to tie the conclusion of this story with that first episode's death. Like how the attempted assassination of Fisk mirrored Foggy's death in a way that Matt moving in to save his rival mirrors what he wished he could have done with his friend. God, that's so good. But okay, at this point, I cannot keep talking about Born Again and not bring up how absolutely fantastic Charlie Cox, Vincent D'Onofrio, and Wilson Bethel are as their comic book characters. At this point, I'd enter Cox into my top 5 superhero castings ever. Enter Cox. If you want to unsubscribe now, I totally get it. Anyway, he perfectly embodies the spirit of the character I've been reading for years. And this might be controversial, but I actually think I like Vincent D'Onofrio's portrayal of Kingpin more than the comic book Kingpin. I acknowledge that they're both different, but D'Onofrio just adds this whole depth to the character that I feel really suits him. And seeing him begin to wrap his tendrils around the political world of New York was absolutely enticing. It also made for some quite humorous moments, like when he's trying to plan his nefarious schemes, but he has to keep doing dumb publicity things to keep his approval rating up. And my god, Bethel as Bullseye is just about as much of a Bullseye casting choice as I've ever seen. The character is insanity personified, yet the actor is still able to make you empathize with him despite all the evil we see him commit firsthand. This trio of performances remain the highlight of the season, even when the show itself was getting really bad. More on this in a bit. Seeing John Bernthal return as the Punisher was also a much welcome addition. He didn't have nearly as much to chew on emotionally as the other characters did, but he was still a delight to see on screen nevertheless. Though the scene between him and Murdoch talking about Foggy's death and the nature of law and order was great stuff, and I wasn't shocked to learn that it was a reshoot since it was actually a good scene. But while there were plenty of good things to be enjoyed here as I just laid out, I guess now it's time to address the elephant in the room. And let's make one thing abundantly clear. This show does not compare to that original series in any way, shape, or form. That thing is in a league of its own, so I will try my best to not constantly bring it up. Acknowledging this fact, I do understand the dilemma that the showrunners were faced with. You want to obviously do more with the Daredevil character in a fresh new story that stands on its own, but at the same time you have entire characters and storylines that need to be addressed from the original series you're spinning off from. You end up having to walk this delicate line, and I don't think they nailed that balance, especially when it comes to juggling the new stuff in with the old. So let's just rip the band-aid off now, shall we? Most of the new characters here, how do I say this, suck. With some characters like BB and Daniel, it took a little while for me to really become invested in what they were adding to the overall story. When BB Yorick first appeared, her street interviews with New York citizens did a lot to flesh out that Manhattan vibe, but I was a bit confused why she was even here to begin with. Now, by the time we got to the conclusion, it was abundantly clear that she was just using her relationship with both Daniel and Kingpin to find out more info about what happened to her uncle, but because of how limited her screen time was, especially when compared to the other story threads, it just comes off as being an afterthought. Cherry and Kristen were absolute drags on the narrative and seemed to bring the series to a screeching halt whenever they were on screen. And no disrespect to those actors, but they were clearly meant to be stand-ins in the place of Karen and Foggy. And after that intense premiere where Foggy was murdered and Karen subsequently left, you're asking a lot for the audience to suddenly become invested in these new sidekicks without doing any of the work to properly flesh them out. I don't know who these people are, and now I'm expected to care about them like I did for the OG crew. And it's especially egregious because you already had a cop who worked with Matt before who you could easily integrate into the series, Brett Mahoney. We as viewers already know who this character is, so it would be much clearly a better fit. Heather was Heather. Obviously, Matt Murdock's greatest superpower isn't his radar sense, but instead his ability to pull the absolute baddest of baddies without even trying. Her character could have been interesting given the fact that she was doing research into the nature of vigilantes and masks, but again, just like every other subplot, this just falls by the wayside. And by the end, when she became just another Fisk lackey, I just felt numb to the whole character in general. The way the newer characters were used leads into another problem I have with the show, and that is pacing. The way that the narrative chooses to cycle through the different plot threads is so haphazardly dumb, and it is clearly a byproduct from the reshoots that were done halfway through production, which leads to an effect of feeling like we're constantly switching gears between storylines, from Mayor Fisk to a vigilante on trial, to Punisher cops, to a crazy artist serial killer without any rhyme or reason. If the showrunners had maybe picked two of these threads to focus on, things really could have been tightened up. And it doesn't help when you have a random filler episode about a bank heist that just stops all these things dead in their tracks. That entire storyline could have been handled in about 10 minutes. Instead, Matt decides to dick around with these generic-ass criminals as we get a forced cameo talking about Miss Marvel constantly. But I would argue that the element that suffered the most from the reshoots was most definitely Muse. Now, while I am a huge Daredevil comic reader, I have not actually read Charles Soule's run of the character, so Muse was a villain who I'd only tangentially heard of. But his involvement in this show made absolutely no sense. And by the time we got to the show's finale, that whole arc stands out like a sore thumb. We are introduced to this troubled young kid during the season premiere when he first meets Heather, and then we never see him again until the show decides that his storyline is over now. And during that scene, he's telling Heather how she's inspired him to become the best version of himself, when we as an audience hadn't seen any of this stuff on screen and forgot he even existed. I personally feel like this entire season should have been dropped all at once like that original Netflix show. I understand that a drawback to that Netflix style of release is that you end up blowing your whole load at once, and by the start of next week people who've binged it have already forgotten about it. But with a season as cobbled together and weirdly paced as Born Again was, you're asking a lot for audience goers to remember key characters and storylines from 6 episodes prior. So in the end, despite the massive grievances I have with Born Again Season 1, I am still excited for that next season. The conclusion really puts us in an interesting direction going forward, and those great elements will really have a time to shine. In a way, I feel like this whole 9-episode run was a 9-hour pilot for a much better show we have right around the corner. Now that doesn't excuse all the issues I have with this season, and it's by far the weakest of all the Daredevil seasons, but I would still lean more favorably upon it when grading it. It's a heck of a lot better than the other content Marvel's been putting out, especially on Disney+. As a fan of Daredevil, I would give this a B-, but as a critic, it's definitely more of a C+. But what did you think? Did you check out the finale of Born Again? Comment your thoughts down below and let me know what you think is going to happen in the second season.